Hello, everyone. I am Nicole Rivas, and this is 15 Minutes of Faith brought to you by Inner City Women of Faith. If you'd like to see a video of this message, you can find it on YouTube at Real Talk for Women of Faith or at Inner City Women of Faith. Also on Facebook at Real Talk for Women of Faith or Inner City Women of Faith. Same thing. Instagram, every social media platform you can imagine, you can find us there. Our topic for today is the God who sees me. The God who sees me. I have been having a really powerful experience with this lately. I mean, I've heard that before, but it's just, God's really been ministering to me that I am the God who sees you, Nick. I see you. So our verse where we're going to be dealing with this, we're going to find it in Genesis 16. Genesis chapter 16. And I'm going to give you a little background, and then I'm going to read a couple of verses because I don't want to read the entire chapter because I might lose you. So I'm just going to explain the background. So God has told Abraham and Sarah, and at this point they're still Abram and Sarai, that he is going to make a mighty nation of them. He is going to bring forth a child from them, and from that they're going to be a mighty nation. Now, God has made this promise over and over again, but guess what, y'all? A lot of time has passed by, and they're getting old, and they don't see it's happening. So like most of us, they decide, you know what? God needs a little help. So they decide to help God. And Sarai, who eventually becomes Sarah, she says, you know what? I've got this maidservant, this young slave woman. Abram, why don't you have relations with her? And maybe I'll get a baby that way. Maybe that was God's plan. Maybe I got to figure out God's plan for him. So Abram says, okay, why not? And he does. And the young slave girl, Hagar, gets pregnant. Now, the minute she figures out she's pregnant, the Bible says she began to despise her mistress. She began to despise Sarah. Now, it's so funny because I looked this up to figure out what that meant. And the literal translation is trifling. She began to be trifling. I had to laugh out loud when I read that. It literally says that in the Bible dictionary, trifling. So the second Hagar figured out she was pregnant, she began to be trifling. She wouldn't listen. She wouldn't do what Sarah asked her to do. She was probably talking back, was never where she was supposed to be. And Sarah had had enough. So she goes to Abram, and of course she takes no responsibility for this mess whatsoever. She says it's his fault and he needs to do something. And Abram, too, not taking responsibility, says, do whatever you want to do. So she starts mistreating Hagar, mistreating her, to the point where Hagar finally just says, I'm done. And she runs away. And here's where we pick up with her. She's in the desert. She's sitting by a stream. And I'm going to guess that at this point, she's gotten past the anger. And it's occurring to her that she's just run away into the desert. And it's kind of like, and what am I going to do now? I was really mad, but now I'm hungry. Don't have a place to sleep. So what am I going to do now? And it's at that point that the angel of the Lord shows up and says, hey, so where are you coming from and where are you going? Which is a good question because she didn't know where she was going. So she starts telling him about how she's been mistreated and so forth. And the angel says, don't worry. Go back to your mistress. Submit to her. You're pregnant and you're going to have a son, and name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your misery. Now, the name Ishmael, it means God hears. Now, this is so powerful because I want you to hear this, because I want you to remember that she is in the desert because she was being trifling. Now, this is important. She wasn't, at this point, she hadn't been kicked out of the family. At this point, she is in the desert by her own choices. And God still looks at her and says, I hear you. Think about that. Can you imagine one of your friends or family members being trifling and they get themselves in a situation and then they want to complain about the situation and your response is, I hear you? Most of us would not do that. Most of us would not do that. Now, I want to point out something else that's really important here, because he says, name him, God hears, because that's what I do. I hear you. And then, just in case so you don't think I mean God hears him or God hears Sarah or God hears someone else, I want you to understand that I'm telling you to name him, God hears, for the Lord has heard your misery. I had to pause there. Not that the Lord saw you acting up and being trifling. Not that the Lord saw you in the midst of this mess in someone else's marriage where you shouldn't have been. No, the Lord saw your misery. And when I looked up that word misery, it means affliction and misery, but it also means poverty. You see, she's not a slave by choice. She was most likely a young girl who was sold into slavery by someone who only saw a commodity, someone that they could use for their benefit, someone that they could get something from. And then she was sold to some people who again saw her only as a commodity, as someone that I want a child, you're available, so I'm going to use you to get the child I want, Sarah. And Abram, I'm going to use you to shut my wife up because I'm tired of hearing her voice. That is what was going on here. That is exactly what was going on. So here is a woman who is not seen by anyone and not heard by anyone. And God says, yes, you've been trifling. Yes, you're acting up. But guess what? I know about the situation that got you here. Not your triflingness, but your poverty. I know about how you got here, so I hear you. Now that is powerful. And I want to stay here a little bit, and I want you to work with the symbolism here for me. Because this woman is an Egyptian. She knows nothing about the God of Abram. The only way she knows anything about the God of Abram, I want you to hear this, is through him and Sarah. That's the only way she knows about them. So I'm going to call Abram and Sarah the church. Because that is the only way this girl who don't know God comes to know God, is through Abram and Sarah, the very people that are using her for their good, irrespective of her feelings or her needs or her poverty. They don't see any of that. They just see how they can use her for what they want. And here is this God who comes along and says, I see that. And she is so blown away by that in verse 13, she says this. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. She's so blown away that this God is not judging her. This God is not blaming her. This God sees how she got here. And she's like, wow, this God sees me. And even more important, she uses two different Greek words. The Greek word that she uses to refer to how she sees God simply means see, apparent, look at, right? But the Greek word that she uses to describe what God does for her, how God sees her, actually means not just see. So yeah, it means see with your eyes, but it means perceive, learn about, look at, look after. It is more than just I caught a glimpse of you. It is I make you my project. I make understanding you and your needs my project. That should blow your mind. That should blow your mind. If you're out there and you're wondering if God sees you, know that how you see God, how you think you see God is you're catching glimpses. But God sees you thoroughly and still loves you. Now, this is the part I don't want to miss. Remember I said Sarah and Abram are the church because they are the ones who know God, and this girl does not know God, although she has now had an encounter. So that's why she says, oh, I'm finally catching a glimpse of this God that those people who call themselves God lovers have been telling me about, but I haven't seen in them. And she says, this God is the God that hears and sees me. Now, hear me, please hear me. There are a lot of people out there that are not feeling seen and heard by the church. There are women who are feeling the call to ministry. They don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to respond, and they don't feel seen or heard by the church. There is a lot of people struggling with identity and sexuality, and they do not feel seen or heard, by the church. There's a lot of women who are pregnant like Hagar, and they have run into the desert and they don't have food. They don't have resources. They don't know what to do. And both sides of the issues are yelling at them what they should do about themselves and that baby. And nobody is hearing them or seeing them. That is not the Spirit of God. The Spirit of God sees and hears people and ministers to their needs. So I'm going to close with this. I want you to take away two lessons. I want you to take away first, the lesson is God sees you and God hears you. And he sees all of you. And the second lesson I want you to take away is that you owe that same thing to other people. To see them and hear them, all of them, and love them anyway. Paul says the same thing in Corinthians. He says, now I see in part, I know in part, but then I will know fully as I am known fully. He's referring to God. He's saying right now, the little pieces I have, I don't completely understand. I don't completely know God, but guess what? God knows me. And one day I will know God fully. Well, since we only see in part, let's give other people some grace. Let's give ourselves some grace. God bless you. Thank you for joining me. You can find a videotape message or this message in video form on YouTube at Real Talk for Women of Faith or Inner City Women of Faith. You can also find Inner City Women of Faith at innercitywomenoffaith.org. Check us out on Facebook. Check us out on Instagram and YouTube again at Real Talk for Women of Faith or at Inner City Women of Faith. I love you. This has been 15 Minutes of Faith. Thank you for being here. See you next week.